pleasure to moderate this session at SphinxConnect 2018. It's entitled Dreams, Stardom, and Management, Myths and Realities from the Lens of Managers and Artists. We have a really fantastic panel here today. We're going to try to make this as an engaged a session as possible. And so one thing I wanted to let you know, we're going to treat this sort of like a radio show, and we want you to send us questions that you have in real time. In about 30 minutes, we'll open up to a more formal Q&A where you can take a microphone and ask a live question. But in the meantime, if you have a device, we'd encourage you to use Slido, the website that the conference is using, to ask questions in real time. And I'll see those questions up here. You can also like questions that you might see from your colleagues in the room. And I'll feed those questions in real time to our panelists as we explore the main themes of today's talk. So please do that. I want to introduce our panel really briefly here. First, we have Juan Miguel Hernandez. He's a professor of viola at the Royal Academy of Music in London. But he's also an absolutely accomplished performer. He won the first prize at the 9th National Sphinx Competition and also the 16th Brahms International Competition. He's played with the Fine Arts Quartet and also a founding member of the Harlem Quartet. And he carries a varied performance and teaching career. Miguel, it's great to have you. Thank you for being here. Please, quick round of applause. Next, we have Julia Torgovitskaya-Rappaport. She's I got to get it right because she's got two companies. President of iCadenza and CEO of Cadenza Artists. She's a consultant for arts leaders and organizations with particular expertise in motivation, empowerment, and team dynamics. And she's going to be speaking today, I think, from the sort of dual perspective of someone who works with touring artists, with management, and also emerging artists. But she's also a trained opera singer and can relate firsthand to the ever-changing challenges facing the arts industry today. It's great to have you, Julia. Next, we have Jeremy Geffen, who is here from New York, Senior Artistic Director and Artistic Advisor for Carnegie Hall. He's a native of South Africa and has served in his role at Carnegie Hall, a role in which he is responsible for the artistic development of all aspects of the Carnegie Hall concert season since 2007. It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you, Jeremy. And finally, Marianne Sciolino, founder and executive director of Sciolino Artist Management. Marianne, in her role with SAM, is that right? Which is a New York-based firm, since 2005 has represented award-winning classical instrumentalists, ensembles, and conductors for engagements with orchestras and in concert venues worldwide. And one thing I wanted to add, looking through your background, you also bring some broad additional experience in international finance. I believe you have an MBA from NYU as well, and 7 years as a university professor of Spanish language and linguistics. So thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to hear your perspectives as well.
Hi.
Great. So we're going to dive right in today. We have a few discussion points. At this point, I would welcome you to post some questions in Slido. The first kind of point we're going to explore is related to this sort of reality that we live in. You know, we're in a gig economy with companies like Airbnb and Lyft that are transforming the ways that we think about what it means to be employed and to create work. And artists are no different. We know that through the research of Strategic National Arts Alumni Project, that about 80% of artists of all disciplines have been self-employed at some point in their careers. So this idea of the portfolio career, you know, a career where you have multiple activities that generate income from multiple streams and hopefully create multiple opportunities for artistic expression, is real. But the question is it viable? Is it an excuse, a consolation prize for some dream that we haven't achieved? Is it the new status quo? Or is it an opportunity? In any case, is it a sustainable model for building a life in the arts today? That's the first question we're going to probe. I want to turn to Marianne first. In your varied background and your work as an artist manager as well, what's your take on the viability of the portfolio career today?
I would say it's a resounding yes. I agree. I think that the portfolio career model is indeed viable. And from what I've seen as an artist manager over the past 13 years, I've seen the artists, at least on my roster, on other people's rosters, develop other kinds of activities, sometimes related to music and sometimes not related to music. The one example here from my roster is Elena Urioste, who I believe is here in the audience, and Melissa White, both violinists, both Sphinx laureates, and both are on my roster as violin soloists. Melissa White is also the second violinist of Harlem Quartet. So they are indeed performing artists, and they together created something called Intermission that weds yoga and classical music. They were given a $24,500 empowerment grant by Sphinx, and they were given this money to launch intermission sessions and retreats, a new program which celebrates the symbiosis between music and yoga and encourages a more mindful approach to practicing, performing, and music making in general.
So we have a brief clip that could
We have
illustrate.
a brief
Okay.
video to show you.
All right.
My name is Melissa White, and I'm a professional violinist as well as the co-founder of Intermission.
And I'm Elena Urioste, also a professional violinist, also a co-founder of Intermission. The benefits that we started receiving from our yoga practices were just sort of mind-blowing. It felt all of a sudden like the pathways from my brain to my fingers had cleared.
A huge benefit was feeling more at peace and centered in my body. And so when I would go on stage, even though I had been doing it for years, it felt a lot more comfortable and enjoyable and pleasant.
Great, thank you. So just as a quick follow-up to this, I mean, would you say that this seems like an interesting, somewhat unique combination that these artists have found, a synthesis between an artistic practice and another practice? And I'm just curious if you could speak to just one more thing, which is sort of what the relative regularity of these kinds of combinations are, or the way that this play, maybe another way to think about it is the way this plays into your artist's career.
Well, I think it is becoming more and more regular.
Yeah.
And in fact, since we had our little phone conversation, the latest issue of Symphony Magazine has come out, and there's a great article by Jennifer Mellick about 3 musicians who have wedded their careers as musicians with photography. And as I said, we just got this in the mail, and I pulled it out, and I just thought it was absolutely brilliant how they've taken these 2 artistic endeavors and wedded them. So I think it's becoming more and more the norm, but it's also not just out of necessity that we need to support ourselves. It's also a part of creative fulfillment. So I think that's
a great
really
point.
key to the discussion.
Great point. I want to turn it over to Julia here too. So Julia, you have a dual perspective. You're also managing artists who are touring and have to deal with sort of considerations of that life. But you're also serving through iCadenza, artists who are emerging or on the front end of their careers and providing resources. So what's your take on sort of this point about the idea of the portfolio career not just being out of necessity, but being an opportunity for combining, interests and creating something that's new and maybe exciting for audiences?
Yeah, I completely agree, and I love what you said, Marianne, about creative fulfillment. It's such a powerful way to position it because artists are creative beings at heart, and I think that the way the educational system works sometimes it feels like there's only one path or only a few different paths available to express that creativity, but the truth is that artists that we work with have so many amazing ideas that are burning inside of them, and the idea and the freedom and giving themselves permission to not choose, but actually figure out a way to make all of those different components that they have, that they want to create, that they want to put out there, exist, and realize part of our work with our artists and our consulting work and our management work is to help them see all the different buckets of their worlds and help them create a brand umbrella, really understanding what am I about as a human being, and how are all the different things that I'm putting out there a manifestation of that, and how can I connect them so that each helps the other, both from a promotional perspective, but also from a psychological, almost spiritual perspective, that this is something that I'm putting out into the world, and it is connected because I am at the epicenter of that.
Great. I mean, I think we have an example as well of an interesting combination. You want to speak maybe to that example, building off this point?
Sure, yeah. So we're going to see a clip in a minute about Laura Downs, who's a fantastic artist on our roster, who's actually also going to be moderating a panel tomorrow, kind of on the topic of leading your own initiative. And what's fascinating about her is that not only does she cross genres, what we'll see in a minute is a clip of her working with a beatboxer, Kevin Alasala, who is a member of Pentatonics, but also she has created a whole educational platform, you know, really working with schools and kids, not in a kind of add-on context to a performance. She does do that sometimes when she has a residency, but also, I mean, there are places that actually have her just come out to work with their kids because she's created these amazing curriculum connected programs. And in addition to that, she launched a record label. And in addition to that, she has all sorts of different projects with jewelry companies and clothing designers and all sorts of stuff. So she combines all of these interests in a very, very multifaceted career that seems like there's all these disparate parts, but the way that we've been able to weave the narrative, and also from a business perspective, you know, thinking about the business model, connecting them all so that they all feed into each other and make sense.
Okay, great. Let's take a quick look.
And this is a clip from, the recording of one of the tracks for her album that's coming out on Sony next week, actually, for Lenny.
All right, that's great. Thank you so much. Okay, so two different examples of synthesis here. One where you see an artist sort of combining what one might, I would say that yoga could be certainly conceived as an expressive activity, but one that might be typically seen as outside of the performing arts and weaving it into performance experience. And in this case, a blending or melding of different sort of artistic influences to create something wholly new. I want to talk a little bit, before we switch gears, let's go back to the questions about the portfolio career, to examine what it means in the cases where we have to combine activities that aren't naturally connected. So Jeremy, as an example, as an arts administrator and arts manager, I think for those who have interest in that area, sometimes the decision about, or the decisions that are made on the sort of pathway to that career are challenging because we often imagine that in order to do that, that means we're giving up our performance career, right? If we're going to do this thing, it's going to take so much time, and whether that's arts management or some other kind of career, that we're, you know, how do we balance, or what is there the potential to balance, you know, this artistic expressive component of one's career within the kind of work that, let's say, you do? I'd love your perspective on that for a moment.
Well, I'll start out with my own path as an example. I was a violist. I was studying at USC, and I ran into some fairly severe hand problems, which continue to this day. And so the decision to not be a performer was actually not my decision. It was my body made that for me. And I don't, but it was a really, it was a very important moment because it made me think about what was important to me, and I definitely wanted to stay involved in music. And I think that more musicians than not have not considered what goes on, what goes into producing a performance. I know that when I was a music student, I just thought the music somehow magically appeared on the stand, and you know, the orchestra was set up by elves, and by working as an intern for the LA Philharmonic, I saw what goes into creating a performance, and that there's a very active and creative world behind the actual performance of music. And that is what worked for me. What I see now among younger musicians is that there are some who gravitate to a blend of performance and administration because both feed them in different ways. And whether it's because they want to have, through administrative responsibilities, they have greater control over their performance careers, or because that uses a different side of their brain and maybe gives them the space to think about the musical decisions that they that are actually very some musical problems are very difficult to solve when you're staring at the page. Yeah. A little bit of distance will allow you to think more broadly about them.
That's great. I mean, you're talking about the transferability of skills, but also another type of opportunity, which is sort of to exercise, these areas of interest. I can relate to that same kind of experience in a different way, I think. Sometimes, it's probably true that we all have our own particular interests and affinities, and so some of us may not be interested in arts management, but I think quite often there are, I see young artists who seem to be particularly interested, but they haven't framed it in that way. They haven't had the opportunity maybe to see the fulfillment that can come through that other activity, which can, in some cases, provide a stable platform, which could provide, depending on your situation, opportunity, right, with less stress to take on those other projects.
Absolutely, and I think about someone like Nadia Sirota. Are people in this room aware of her career? She started out as she was a violist studying at Juilliard. She happened to have made composer friends, took a very active interest in creating repertoire, and through her interest in new music has been led down many paths. She's a member of different ensembles. Yeah. She has a strong administrative responsibility now, first through Meet the Composer, her yeah. podcast, but now thinking more broadly about her role as a representative for new music in general. Mm-hmm.
That's great. Yeah, I would second that plug for Nadia Sirota to check it out. Great. So I want to. We actually have a performing artist, one might say, has a portfolio career here on the stage. So Miguel, I want to ask you a question related to it. We actually have a couple of questions from the audience. I want to include one of those now. Can you speak to? Let's pick this question first. So. Thinking about your career and the realities that you've seen over the past 15, 20 years, can you talk a little bit about what you see has changed or has not changed from the performer's perspective relative to this discussion in terms of building, an identity? And then we have a follow-up question about when's the right time to start thinking about your brand. So anyway, I'd love to hear your perspective on the things you've seen that have or have not changed in terms of building a performance career.
Well, I think that where I come from, what my background looks like a bit is I grew up listening and watching videos about Heifetz and William Primrose yeah. and Piatigorsky and all these golden era heroes. So obviously I grew up with the image of having a career like theirs, a classical musician who would be managed, traveling the world, playing with, other great artists and conductors, and that was about it. That was the image I had. It wasn't very diverse of an idea, right? It was very, I felt I was very focused for many years. I wasn't very open to what was going on around me, and I wasn't thinking about combining different things. So, and I know that other of my friends also kind of had that narrow-minded focus. With time, it did take me a little while to sort of accept that things were changing. I was, a pretty conservative, I guess, for a while, until I did started embracing and realize, whoa, there's all this incredible other art forms and other, just so many interesting things around me. And and interesting people of all backgrounds and coming from different, different art forms, all that. And I started seeing people combining this. So this shift is actually really exciting. Once you start embracing it, and once I saw, friends embracing it and coming out with really interesting projects, I have a couple examples. For example, actually, one of Julia's artists, he's a good friend of mine, Jacob Shaw. He's a cellist who has a passion, just this insane passion for food. I was just there for New Year's in Copenhagen eating his 5-star restaurant style food. And he now wants he is now putting a project together, and he showed it to me, just this beautifully laid out project, which will combine pairing food and wine and music. And one of his festivals that him and his family have in France is also based around food. People come to eat food and then play music, But the whole idea, he's brought two of his passions together, and it's working beautifully. Out of friendship with a friend of mine who's in the more like electronic music world, we were really racking our brains trying to think, how can we collaborate? We have these two artists, and it took about a year before we finally came to something we both enjoyed, combining viola and analog modular synthesizer. And we recorded, in his home, we recorded this Arver part Fratre, where we punched in a MIDI, the piano MIDI into the computer through his analog synthesizer. And anyways, and we filmed it, and it got a really, really great response. And so now we have this project to, move that forward. Anyways, all of these things are kind of blow my mind because I didn't grow up with that idea, but I find it to be a really exciting time for classical music because I think the classical music community is starting to embrace this idea that, okay, classical music is now going to sort of melt into with other forms of arts, and that's what the classical music world is going to be.
That's great. So you're talking a little bit about this sort of transition I think we see from this sort of, static is not the right word, but a sort of golden era image of what a classical musician is to maybe a more progressive image of what an artist can be that might draw from inspirations that cross over from a variety of genres and a sort of post-genre mentality. I would just, as a follow-up related to this question of what has and has not changed, it seems to me that there are more branding opportunities, but there may also be pressure on artists to really think about their own brand and own that. And the way that this question was posed from the audience was, at what time is the right time to start thinking about your brand or who an artist is as a human being? It's an interesting way to frame that question, and I wanted to do that accurately. So could you just quickly follow up, from your perspective, when you're thinking, because you're also mentoring young performers now in your role as an educator, is there a danger of thinking about your brand too early? Or should artists who are in school be doubling down on their technique and then dealing with it later? Or how do you conceive of the kind of process of cultivating that sort of identity as part of an education?
I think if an idea comes to you, it doesn't matter how old you are. Now you see on social media, you see any age coming out with crazy things, and it catches or it doesn't. But I think that if there's a great idea that's sprouting out of you, you have to go for it, and it'll be if it gets in the way of your education and practicing all this. I think it's naturally gonna sort of pave a way, which might be a little unconventional, but I think that it's important. Art has to rule in a way.
I like that.
Yeah.
So it sounds like what you're saying is carve out time to experiment. You obviously have to hone your technique and your skills, but there's also time in that process to experiment and figure out the things that are particularly inspiring that might actually drive opportunity later for you as well. Yeah. I want to follow up here for the rest of our panel. A follow-up question here. I think this is framed towards arts managers, and then so I want to get Julia and Marianne's take, and then I want to ask Jeremy a follow-up. So the question is, what convinces you to work with a particular artist? It's a broad question. And how can a young musician approach one of you? What are the processes by which, let's say, young aspiring musicians would approach you or could approach you about the idea of management and support. Julia, you want to give a quick take?
And it's funny, kind of, the brand conversation leads us well into this, I think. And just one quick note on the brand, because I think it relates to this too, is I think it's really important to think about the brand as something that grows and changes and evolves. But really, the brand is about your presentation. To me, I like to think about the brand from the mission perspective. What's your mission? What are you trying to do? And then your brand is how you express that mission. And so when artists come to us about representation, when they have clarity of how they want to be perceived, of how they want to position their brand, that allows us to get ideas. So when an artist comes to me with a very wishy-washy concept of what they do, that doesn't mean that we wouldn't want to work with them. It just means that it'll take me that many hours to figure out what they do. You know what I mean? And sometimes I just don't have those hours. Often I don't have those hours, and that's the most frustrating thing for me about my life at this juncture, is just how little time I have. And artistry is it runs deep. And so I think the power of the brand and the purpose for the brand is to really capture in as few words as possible and as a direct way as possible what you're trying to communicate. And that goes for everything. It's not just the statement that you have on your website, or it's how you talk. What is your bio saying about you? Is it listing the things that you've done, or is it getting to the heart of what you stand for? Because it really does kind of come down to energy. You know, artists that have huge careers are artists that galvanize attention because of the energy that they spark in people. And when an artist does that for me, I want to get behind them, and I want to put my energy towards getting their work out there. But then it's also, videos and visual content these days. Like you were talking about Jacob Shaw's presentation. I think he's one of the few artists that I work with that really, I don't have to coach him on that at all. He just has this visual aesthetic that he understands what's going to jump off the page. I think it's really important for artists these days to not underestimate the power of the visual, because we're in a really visual society now. So that's really important. And then I'll add one last thing, which honestly is number one for me at this point, which is, who is the human? Is this someone that I actually want to work with? Is this someone that's going to be both, Laura Downs is a great example of an artist that I love working with, because she comes to me with thousands of ideas every single day. So she's driving our work together for her, but she's also very open, and she's really receptive to feedback and coaching. And that allows us to have a really good partnership, because there's that interplay.
That's fantastic. So Marian, I'm just curious your perspective on this question as well, because
I may be answering this question in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
In fact, I thought about this last point that you had made about barriers, and I gave that some thought. And I was thinking, when I take somebody on my roster, I guess I really care about who they are as a human being. I think, do you care about your community? Do you care about working in communities? All of the artists on my roster care about working in the community, and I guess maybe that's the personal mission that I have. So I think I spend a lot of time with an artist asking them about who they are. So, of course, there has to be artistic excellence, and there has to be chemistry with me, because I'm not all things to all people, and you might not just get along with me.
Yeah.
But I care about humility, and I think that that's one of the hardest things to achieve, and I think personally it's extremely hard for me to achieve. So I would say that that is one of the biggest things I look for in an artist, other than artistic excellence.
that's great. Thank you. So a couple of a theme has emerged here, right? Which is a sort of maybe thinking, as an artist, thinking a little bit less about branding, more about identity as a starting point is a key thing, right? Understanding the why behind the decisions that you're making as an artist and what you want to achieve through your art is a key, maybe prerequisite.
Absolutely. It's not that I really care if they dress well and their hair is cut properly and their makeup is right. I care about very, very much, because as Julia says, we live in a visual society. But I would just go back to my first point and say that is primordial for me.
That's great. Miguel had one thing to quickly add.
Yeah, it's interesting because we have two managers here and talking about what they like and finding artists they're going to work with. And just since I'm the artist, you know, I've worked with Marianne for 11 years. From the artist perspective, that's it. It's important for us to understand what is a manager. You know, we all have this idea, oh, I want a manager, I want a manager. When I have a manager, it means I've made it, sort of thing. But no, in fact, really what it is, it's, yes, someone you're paying, but it's somebody, another human being who believes in you. And when you find the right manager, that chemistry they're talking about is actually all that matters. You're looking, when you're looking for a manager, you're looking for someone that does believe in you and that's going to help shape that branding we've been talking about. And so it's not just about having a manager. Having just a manager can actually be quite destructive if it's not the right one. It could lead to a lot of issues. So I just wanted to make that point, that's very important. That relationship is actually all that matters, a relationship with another human being. It's a team, really, yeah.
That's a great point, and that's where I want to lead to one more point and invite Jeremy to speak to it, and then open up to our live Q&A. We've got a lot of questions that have popped up, and so, I mean, the missing ingredient from this conversation in terms of that relationship, right, is you can have the right fit between artist and manager, but then you also need to have the presenter. You need to have the space to present the work. And so I love your perspective on the question, I guess, Jeremy, of, you know, what are the ways that you think about maybe what has or hasn't changed in terms of presenting artists, and also how you build relationships with artists and also the management team. And so I'd love to hear that, and I want to include this one other point, which is a question from the audience. And it's actually, we'll see how we can address it, but the question is, are portfolio-styled careers a remedy for organizations that don't or can't pay living wages? And what role do orchestra management teams, for example, play in this? We don't have orchestra management team representatives here, but I'm sure that this is something that you think about too in terms of the artists that you work with and the relationships that you build with other people even on your team. Can you speak a little bit to that, about the ways that you build relationships with artists and how you think about programming work in the 21st century?
So, first of all, did any of you see Ken Burns' documentary on the Vietnam War?
Some of it.
It was 17 hours, and you're forgiven for not watching the whole thing. But there was a point very early on that was made that all wars are initially fought based on what was successful in the previous war, big war. And I think there is a danger, especially when one is a student, in relying too heavily solely on the advice of your teacher, who by definition is a mentor and develop his or her own career at a different time. Things have evolved. There are more people. The death knells for classical music have been sounded for generations, and they are great, given far too much airtime. We probably talk about the problems within classical music more than we talk about what's good about this field. There are more people listening to classical music now than ever. There are more people attending concerts than ever. There are just many more opportunities in general for people to hear what we produce, and that leaves room for that. It means that the flagship institutions, the orchestras, the large presenters are seeing audiences, but also smaller ensembles, self-presented groups are getting a lot of traction. And I wouldn't say that it's a failure on the part of orchestras or opera companies or large institutions that they're unable to employ all the musicians who are coming out of conservatories. I think those are very specific paths. What the portfolio career has done has given agency to individual artists to say, this is what is important to me. This is what I want to focus on. It may not align directly with the mission of a large institution. But that's okay because I'm going to be fulfilled in a different way. And I think we probably have all heard stories of people getting into a large orchestra and thinking this is going to be where I'm going to be for the rest of my life, and all my problems are solved. And then finding that there is an element, since they actually give up a level of agency to be part of these institutions, that they start to view their work as onerous because they actually don't have any personal involvement in it aside from rehearsing and performing. So the portfolio career allows artists to balance what brings in the income with what actually feeds their artistic side, if those two are not the same thing.
That's great. So one of the themes I think you're pointing to here is sort of the idea of agency and risk tolerance. And this is something that artists are grappling with in a deeper way, maybe, or more presently from an earlier age than they may have had to 25 or 30 or 50 years ago, just by the very nature of the arts ecosystem and the competitiveness to get opportunities. I want to open this up to questions live. There are some questions here that we can pull from, general questions about, preventing this feeling of being spread too thin, this easy to get stuck on the little hamster wheel of just producing in the gig economy. Other questions about how to potentially balance a portfolio career if a young artist is being pushed towards thinking about the either-or scenario of pursuing a chamber career versus a solo career. I'd love to get questions that you have, if there are any. Should I give this mic up? And if you have, just raise your hand and we can send a mic over.
Hi, my name is Sajda Muhammad. I'm from Chicago, and my question is, would you think that people will still be considered classical musicians as we mix with other things? Like, as the intermission artists, would they be invited to classical or Carnegie Hall, and why do you think?
I think actually we're in the new music space right now. One of the things that's most exciting is that there is this general dropping of boundaries, that people are less concerned about the type of music you're writing and more concerned about its quality. So whatever labels you choose to describe new music, as long as it's good, people are likely going to be interested. And I think specifically about the example of Why Music, which is a sextet, which is a very unusually scored sextet: violin, viola, cello, flute, clarinet, and trumpet, which started out really as a backup band for pop acts, for indie pop acts, and discovered along the way that there could be a repertoire written for this combination that can stand on its own. And Carnegie Hall is happy to engage Why Music because they have fantastic taste, they have fantastic artistic sensibilities that we want to get behind, and they are more than the backup band than they started out being. Does that answer your question?
How about viola and modular synthesizer?
I think we should probably talk.
Hi, my name is Garrett. I'm a bassoonist with the Knoxville Symphony Orchestra, and I produce and host classical music on Knoxville's NPR affiliate. Jeremy, I first want to say I'm also a USC alum, so it's been great to hear from you. I want to get back to the human side of an artist discussion. From your perspectives, is being a great personality in itself marketable? Have you ever been compelled to work with an artist because of who they are more than the artistic package they're bringing to the table?
I guess I can take that. I think that personality matters a lot, and kind of related to the breadth of genre that we're experiencing. You can play a significant role in just talking from the stage, creating an experience from the stage, creating a concert that's not just about the music, but really is about a presentation that is broader. And I think if it's, I think what you're asking, though, is personalities in terms of just synergy, that there's a synergy in personality. That's kind of what Marianne was talking about, too, a little bit. I think, to me, yes, I think it depends on the artist, and for me, it's critical that any artist that we work with, that we represent, that there is that artistic excellence. So if the artistic excellence is lacking in the area that the artist is currently pursuing, if they have the personality that warrants me making further inquiry, then we would kind of investigate what might be a better format for them that does create that artistic excellence. So there is some gray there for sure, but without an artistic project that is truly excellent, branching out and thinking about other things, what else is the artist passionate about that I would want to get behind? But there is a certain point at which there is kind of a cutoff in terms of what I personally feel should be on a stage, artistically.
That did make me think about one point. It's important to realize, too, that this is a business which heavily relies on contacts and relationships. And so whatever you do, violin, viola, other things, it doesn't matter, people will hire you based on their personal experience with you. And they'll be more curious about you if they met you and you were friendly and fun to be around, all that. And so, yeah, sometimes you'll be like, how is it that other person got that opportunity? I should have gotten that. Well, could be something to do with the contacts he had, the relationship that they built with certain people. So I just think it's important to realize that is the reality, that personality will come, is important. And so, yeah.
Can I add on to that?
Of course you can, please.
I've worked with Miguel for 11 years, and he's got the greatest personality of anybody I've ever met in my entire life, okay? That's true. Come on, Miguel.
Melissa White, she's my idol.
All right, well, I can remember.
Stiff competition.
Do you remember Martha's Vineyard? Do you remember how you networked until you found a place for everybody to stay in Boston?
Yeah, we all have our strengths.
Yeah, so they needed a place to stay in Boston during your NEC residency, remember? Yeah. Okay, and they didn't know a place to stay, and they were panicking. It was like, where's everybody going to stay? Where's Harlem Quartet going to stay? And he chatted up one of the donors, and all of a sudden he says, oh, we have a place to stay now. Now that had nothing to do with his ability to play the viola. It has an ability to be charismatic and to be real and to engage and to win some guy over who said, hey, let me just open up my house for you, and that's problem solved, right?
Yeah. No, it's very important. Yeah, thank you.
Could I just add that for presenters, we rely on the way that that managers represent artists to us and the way that artists represent themselves. Sometimes the first engagement is it can be something that is a fairly standard engagement. It's a recital. It's a quartet performance. It's for a specific purpose that is determined by the needs of that presenter. But as the relationship develops and as you get to know that particular artist's strengths, you become aware of where or where not they might fit into where you're trying to direct your organization. And I think this whole what works for the individual works for the whole. Yesterday, Aaron in the plenary session was talking about making yourself open to failure. Are there people in this room who are still in conservatory or below in secondary education? All right, I see a few hands. There's never going to be as much opportunity for failure as you have in conservatory. And it's failure in the absolute best sense because you have the safety net of the institution. Most likely, if things don't go well, it will be forgotten, and it helps you to determine what does or does not work for you, and it may actually send you down a path that you, taking that risk might send you down a path that you had not otherwise considered. So if you're still in school, I encourage you to do things that are well outside of your line of sight at the moment.
That's great advice. Thank you. I think that that's a good segue. We have maybe time for one more question. I want to make sure that if there's another question here, I'll let the mic come on over. Oh, I think we're going in the back. We'll have some time to chat after the session ends as well.
Hi. Sorry. My name is Moira. I go to NEC, and I was wondering, in a generation or in a time where social media makes it so makes self-promotion so much more accessible, how does that change or shape the role of the manager? And the second part of that question is, and how do we as young musicians, find the right representation?
Great questions, and we have just a couple minutes, so we'll have to kind of speed respond.
I'll just quickly say about social media, it's very important to us as managers, and we care a lot if our artists are active in social media, and we try to work with them. We encourage them to get onto social media, put their stuff on social media, and we're right on top of it, either retweeting or adding on to what they've already done. And that would be quickly. What was your second question? About how to choose a manager? Yeah. Meet with that person, meet with several different managers. When somebody comes to me, I tell them, don't just meet with me, meet with 4 or 5 other people, and then circle back and see who might be the best fit for you.
Yeah, social media, we all have mixed feelings about it, but if you see it from the business perspective and you have a dedicated Facebook either page or friend page for business, not one where you put your family reunions and every meal you do and then your concert. No, don't try to have a professional looking page. And it's important. I think this embracing technology, embracing that we have that, and the fact that everyone is adding a competitive edge, of course. But I think if you see it that way, it's actually a very empowering tool to use, and used in the right way can be really, really beneficial. So I encourage it very much. And in terms of, as an artist, in terms of finding a manager, I mean, yeah, how do you find one? It can seem like, well, is a manager going to come to me one day or something? I think you have people who have management. It's important to go on their websites, look at who they represent, either see if they're lacking something. If you have something you can offer, they might be interested, or maybe they don't have it because they're not interested. So you have to inquire, and also see if they represent a lot of people that are similar to what you do. Maybe they do enjoy managing that kind of person. So also might be a good idea to approach that kind of management. But it's just about contacting and asking, sending your portfolio, and it's like job hunting in a way. Yeah.
One thing about social media, even if you are allergic to it, make sure that the first Google search result on your name is something that you are proud of, and make sure that the first YouTube video that comes up when your name is typed in is something that represents you well, because no one's going to do that for you, and presenters are going to look you up if they're interested in you.
I'll just jump in really quickly. When it comes to social media, as well as networking in general, in person, or by email, I just really want to encourage everyone, all of us really, but especially young artists, as you're trying to find your identity, to just really focus on your mindset. Because the things that you will get that will transpire as a result of your any kind of networking, social or otherwise, will have everything to do with your mindset and very little to do with what you actually do. So if your mindset is this frazzled, frenzied place of, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm just going to do everything, you will see results that will match that. So I really encourage you to really slow down and really get under the core purpose of what you're trying to do and where you're trying to go, and trying to take a deep breath and try to really listen in to that intuitive voice that all of you have inside of you as you go through it, because as you network with people, that is what they're going to get a sense for. Talk about personal brand. You know, you want to be the kind of person that people want to communicate with, and that is the number one thing that you want to put out there. And if you filter what to put on social media through that lens of what kind of experience do I want people to have with me, what do I want to put out there, it'll help focus your efforts. And then in terms of choosing a manager, again, similar concept of just, you know, don't go for quantity, really go for what feels right. And when you're approaching the manager, like you said, you know, really think about, look at what they're already representing. If what you're doing is very different from that, acknowledge that when you reach out to them and share, and basically, you know, get them enrolled in the idea that this is going to be a great idea, you know, for them to work with you for that reason. It's amazing when you're intentional about things. It's really amazing the doors that open up. And I think, at least speaking for myself, often when I'm doing something that's different, when I'm doing something that I haven't seen a model for, when I'm doing something that's just like, I have this idea, but I don't know if it's appropriate, that tentative energy stops things from happening. But when I just say, you know what, this is what I want, and I'm going to ask for it, and I'm going to be really nice because, you know, I'm not insisting on it. I don't know if it's possible or not, but I'm just going to ask. There's never any harm in asking, but be specific and be directional with how you do that.
That's great advice and a great capstone for the conversation today. I wish we had more time, but unfortunately, we are out. I know there were many questions left to be asked, and I think that last point about organically building connections based on shared interest and finding ways to relate to other people is a great call to action for the end of this session for the rest of SphinxConnect to please connect with our panelists and everyone else here to explore these topics further. But for now, please join me in thanking our panel for this great conversation. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you at the next session.